My name is Andre Hamer. I'm an artist from New Zealand. My practice moves between painting and also projects that deal with the internet and the idea of the archive. The idea of the archive is fundamentally important in a contemporary sense, where there's a transitioning happening between physical, real-world objects as archival objects and a digital archive that is ephemeral and immaterial in nature. In painting, historically, painting has kind of been this tool that captures the artifacts, whether it's image, aesthetic, cultural, political, fragments of the moment, and is almost like a recording device. The idea of the archive in the broader sense is interesting when we speak of, say, museums, which are obviously designed historically to hold physical artifacts, physical objects. The role of the museum is, I suppose, at a transition point in terms of culture being accessible remotely. I was trying to conceive of a project that could operate in a more open source way, where it was almost as though we could engage with a whole group of performers, filmographers, other artists, and through a kind of cooperation between those people, make a project that, although I gave it its initial, I guess, design in terms of what I wanted it to be, that it could grow organically and beyond my first person kind of intervention. And so the idea was born to create a series called Live at the Museum. Live at the Museum is a series of videos. Each video shows a performer performing in front of a major art museum. More often than not, the performers that are performing are from the cities, they're locals to the cities that they're performing in, with a few exceptions. Some of the performers are also transient workers or perhaps professional buskers who are just passing through those places. A lot of the time the video is being recorded through volunteers or through even professional videographers who have kind of donated their time to record these videos. The idea of these works is that we locate people who are perhaps on the periphery of their particular professional cultures or societies, and so these are people who may be great musicians, great performers, or by contrast they might be not so great at what they do, and the performative element is more through the necessity of perhaps earning money through being a street performer or a busker, than it is about the aspiration to be a great performer. Some of the performers we have are very serious musicians, and they're dedicated to what they're doing, and vice versa. Other performers are there through need or just perhaps for fun. So there's a whole range of people in these videos. The age span goes from, I suppose, end of high school to college students, through to people who are in their late 60s and are, I guess, at the end of their professional careers. There are some beautiful performances, and there are some, I guess, more comedic performances, and the beauty lies in the spirit of the people performing and how these people have perhaps gone unseen in terms of their aspirations. They're people who have slipped through the gaps of kind of institutional expectations. And there's a really interesting contemporary point in that, I guess, if we're talking about a culture of mass media saturation, where there is so much cultural product and it's so much more accessible than it ever was, how a person simply standing in the street that might have just one or two people walking along it can ever really be heard or seen. And by contrast, the buildings they're standing against are kind of the architectural manifestation of the highest culture, the gatekeepers of that culture. And so these museums, contemporary art spaces, they're extremely selective and they're curated. And I guess the idea for the series is that these are not performers that are curated through ability or institutional affiliation. They're simply people who we managed to find on the street, who were available, who were performing, and hopefully there's a democracy in that approach that comes across. I guess the idea of freedom in context of this exhibition is really important. So the series is hopefully extremely democratic and can expose performers from all over the world, not for the pursuit of some fame or institutional success, but simply to be seen and to be heard. And I guess that's the single most important kind of democratic pursuit you can have. Financially too, there's something interesting. What we try and do is we pay the performers a fee for performing the work, and we hope that fee is fair to them and makes sense in terms of what they should be getting paid. And what we hope in time is to set up a system where through the website people can access these videos and also donate to the performers, hopefully digitally through perhaps a digital currency such as Bitcoin. And so from anywhere in the world a viewer can, I guess, tip the busker. And so rather than waiting for people to sort of tip these buskers on a quiet street in Wellington, New Zealand, or in Seoul, Korea, or even in New York, of course we have 1,000 other buskers competing with you. Hopefully this will encourage kind of a one-to-one decentralized scenario where someone from Milan can tip a busker from New Zealand instantaneously, and so that's what we hope to develop over time. So I guess this idea of decentralized currency, it fits in well with the idea of this decentralized artwork in some ways. I think the work filmed in Milan, for example, the gypsy performers that are there, they were all performers who are actually at a very prestigious music school, and although they look like outsiders in terms of their performance, in terms of the way they are presented, in fact they're very talented musicians, and you can see that in the performance itself. And so there's this interesting contradiction where we perhaps don't value the performance, the ability of people in the context of street performance, and in the context of being outside of the institution. So a performer within the institution, I guess, is held to a higher cultural state than someone standing just 10 meters away outside performing. Those people are almost marginalized because they're operating with, removed from the institution. At the same time, I guess it's not an anti-institutional series of work. The institutions are there, I guess, as a continued and consistent landscape to these works. A consistent reminder where the architecture, be it in Sydney, Australia, be it in New York City, Tokyo, the landscape and the architecture of these places doesn't change a lot. And so these institutions of dominant culture, they kind of wear the same guise. And that's really interesting. The columns, the number of steps leading up to it. There's a very strong architectural removal from people and the works or the artwork happening inside the institution. And that idea of the gatekeeper is really emphasized. And so, it's therefore a prop in a lot of ways. And the performer is really front and center. And hopefully through the performances, the thing that becomes more obvious is how overlooked so many of these performers are, and how we might better curate culture in a contemporary age where we do not need to centralize so much, where culture can be a little bit more open, and we can be more experimental in the way we make it and the way that we view it. And that also ties in with the idea of freedom in this exhibition.